Welcome to the Psychology Undergrad. Imagine your brain, literally cannot tell the difference between running for your life from a hungry bear in the woods and walking down the aisle to get married.
Right.
Biologically, the panic alarm ringing in your nervous system is exactly the same.
Because to your autonomic nervous system, a demand for change is simply, well, it's just a demand for change. It really doesn't care if you're wearing hiking boots or a tuxedo.
Yeah, totally.
The physiological flood of hormones, it just does not distinguish between terror and joy.
Which is such a wild concept to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
So today we're reviewing our notes on Chapter 9.
Oh, the beast of a chapter. Stress-related disorders and health psychology.
Exactly. We are unpacking the hidden mechanics of stress to help you, a fellow student, prep for our upcoming exam. But honestly, we also want to help you understand your own life a little better.
For sure, because I feel like we throw the word stress around constantly on campus.
Oh, all the time. You say you're stressed about a paper or stressed about rent money, but we really want to look at what that word actually means under a microscope. Like, how does a thought in your head literally remodel your immune system?
To understand that, we actually have to start with the origin of the concept itself. The father of stress was a researcher named Dr. Hans Selye.
Wait, he was at McGill, right?
Yeah, McGill University in Montreal. And this was back in the mid-20th century. But the funny thing is, he wasn't even a psychologist. He was an endocrinologist.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, he was studying lab animals, exposing them to different things like extreme cold, heat, physical exertion. And he noticed this universal pattern.
A physiological pattern.
Exactly. No matter what the external trigger was, the animals exhibited the exact same non-specific physiological response. And he called this universal reaction the general adaptation syndrome, or, GAS.
Okay, and GAS is actually a perfect mnemonic for the exam. You can think of it like a car running out of gas.
I love that analogy.
Right, so Selye mapped this out in 3 distinct phases. Phase 1 is the alarm reaction. That is your dashboard warning light just violently flashing red. Your autonomic nervous system activates, your heart pounds.
It's basically the moment you realize you have a massive final exam tomorrow that you haven't studied for.
Yes, sheer panic. But then comes phase 2, which is resistance.
So the warning light is still flashing, but you are now essentially coasting on fumes. Your body is attempting to adapt, to cope with the stressor.
Like pulling an all-nighter.
Exactly. Your endocrine system is just pumping out hormones to keep you awake and focused. But the problem is those resources are totally finite.
Which leads directly to phase 3 exhaustion.
Yeah.
The engine just stalls completely.
Yeah, you're out of gas.
The stressor hasn't gone away, but your body's adaptive energy is completely depleted. In the textbook notes, this is where irreversible tissue damage or, even death can occur. The system just crashes.
It's brutal. But Selye also introduced a fascinating distinction here between distress, which is the damaging, unpleasant stress we always complain about, and eustress.
Eustress, the positive kind.
Right, eustress is a positive, pleasant stress, like the thrill of a roller coaster or the excitement of graduation. Both of those activate the general adaptation syndrome, but how we frame that activation mentally, it makes a profound difference in how our body ultimately handles it.
There is a really compelling historical footnote in our notes about Selye regarding that exact idea of mental framing.
Oh, about his illness.
Yeah. So later in his life, he developed a rare and usually fatal malignancy, basically cancer. But Selye actually attributed his remarkable recovery from it to his strong desire to continue his work and his profound belief that his faith could reverse his condition.
Which is so interesting because it introduces this heavy intersection between biology, morality, and religion. It suggests that our belief systems, our sense of purpose, or our faith, they aren't just like abstract comforts.
Right.
They might literally alter our psychoneuroimmunology. Like how we mentally and spiritually process adversity can actually change the physiological environment of our cells.
That is incredible. But let me push back on the biology for a second, though.
Okay, go for it.
If eustress and distress both trigger that initial alarm phase, does that mean getting married causes the exact same physiological wear and tear as, say, getting fired?
Well, the initial spike is incredibly similar, yes. Your heart rate increases, your respiration changes.
So it's the same.
Initially. But the long-term cascade of hormones differs based on your cognitive appraisal of the event. And that appraisal dictates how quickly your body returns to baseline. Which actually brings up a huge problem researchers faced in the 1960s. Like, how do you measure this invisible force to see if it makes people sick?
Right, because you can't just put a thermometer in someone's mouth and read their stress level.
Exactly. So researchers Holmes and Rahe created the Social Readjustment Rating Scale, the SRRS.
Okay, I remember this. They basically made a checklist of major life events, right?
Yeah. And to set a mathematical baseline, they arbitrarily assigned marriage a score of 500, which they later revised to 50 in the 90s, but still. Every other life event was scaled relative to marriage.
Wait, so if getting married is a 50, what are the bad things?
Well, the death of a spouse is a 119, divorce is a 96, getting fired is a 51.
Wow, getting fired is barely worse than getting married according to the math.
Basically, the theory was that you tally up your life change units over a year, and if your score is high enough, you are statistically far more likely to develop a physical illness, like a heart attack or leukemia.
But the textbook completely flips the script on this, right? Because it turns out those major catastrophic life events are not actually the best predictors of who ends up in the hospital.
No, they aren't.
The real danger is daily hassles. Researchers eventually built new tools, like the Brief College Hassle Scale, to track the mundane stuff.
Oh, yeah, the stuff we deal with every single day.
Exactly. Academic deadlines, owing money, chronic lack of sleep, arguing with a roommate. The data shows these minor daily hassles are far better predictors of physical illness than the massive life traumas.
And the mechanism behind that is something called allostatic load. Think of your body's stress response like a smartphone battery.
Okay, I like that.
Major life events are like dropping the phone. It's a huge shock. It might crack the screen, but you can usually repair it. Daily hassles, though, are like having 50 different apps running in the background simultaneously.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Right. None of them seem like a big deal on their own, but they constantly drain the battery until the hardware itself permanently degrades.
It's literally death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Exactly.
But I still wonder, why the body handles the big shocks better than the background apps. Like, is it a social thing?
What do you mean?
Well, if my apartment burns down, that's a massive tragedy. But my community rallies, right? People bring me casseroles, my professors give me extensions. I get profound sympathy.
Yeah, everyone shows up for you.
But if I am just exhausted, broke, and overwhelmed on a random Tuesday, nobody brings me a casserole.
That is such a good point. You've hit on the exact buffering mechanism. Major life events trigger structural and functional social support. Your community activates a safety net that physically downregulates your nervous system.
But daily hassles are just isolating.
Completely isolating. You face them alone day after day, and that constant low-grade cortisol drip just chips away at your allostatic load without ever triggering the social rescue response.
And for students, this is basically an epidemic. I mean, the National College Health Assessment found that over 43% of students report facing more than average stress.
Over 43%, that's huge.
It is. And the things destroying academic performance aren't a lack of intelligence. They are stress, sickness, and sleep deprivation.
So if we are all walking around with 50 acts draining our batteries, why do some students end up with severe burnout or illness while others seem completely fine?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
And our notes point directly to Richard Lazarus and his transactional model of stress.
Lazarus. He fundamentally changed how we view this, didn't he?
He really did. He argued that stress isn't a thing that happens to you. It is a transaction between you and your environment based entirely on your cognitive appraisal.
Okay, break that down for me.
So, when you face a stressor, say a massive final exam, your brain instantly calculates your resources. If you feel you have the knowledge and time to handle it, you appraise it as a challenge. Your body responds with focused energy.
But if I look at that same exam and realize I haven't opened the book all semester, my perceived resources are basically zero.
Yep.
So I appraise it as a threat. And that's when the toxic biological stress response kicks in. Once we label something a threat, we have to cope with it. And the text outlines two main strategies, right? Problem-focused coping and emotion-focused coping.
Let's define those for the exam. Problem-focused coping is taking direct instrumental action to change the stressor itself. It is highly effective for controllable situations.
So if you are stressed about that exam, problem-focused coping is sitting down and mapping out a 5-day study schedule.
It's exactly fixing the problem.
But what if you can't control the situation? Say you already took the exam and you're just waiting for the grade. Or like you're waiting for a medical biopsy result. No amount of scheduling fixes that.
Right, and that's where emotion-focused coping comes in. You try to reduce the negative emotional reaction. You distract yourself, you meditate, you talk to a friend.
Interestingly, when researchers measure these strategies using something called the COPE scale, one of the primary active coping mechanisms listed is religion.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the specific item on the scale is, I've been putting my trust in God.
Which brings us right back to the morality and values dimension of health psychology. How we choose to face adversity seems deeply tied to our character.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, is it a moral failing to use something like avoidance or denial when things get hard? Because the textbook cites a study on breast cancer patients showing that women who used avoidant coping, essentially refusing to accept the diagnosis and living in denial, actually saw a faster progression of the disease.
Oh, wow. The biological reality is just incredibly unforgiving when it comes to denial, isn't it?
It really is.
Because ignoring a threat doesn't turn off the autonomic nervous system. It usually prolongs the alarm phase indefinitely because you are doing nothing to resolve the underlying issue. Which actually brings us to the work of Canadian psychologist Norman Endler on trait coping.
Oh, Andler. He heavily researched emotional preoccupation, right?
Yes, which we commonly call rumination.
Rumination is the absolute worst. Let me try an analogy here to help remember it.
Oh, for it.
Okay, so if a pipe bursts in your apartment, problem-focused coping is grabbing a wrench to fix the leak.
Makes sense?
Emotion-focused coping is putting a bucket under it so you don't ruin the floor while you wait for the plumber.
Okay, good. And rumination.
Rumination is sitting in the growing puddle, complaining about how cold the water is, replaying the exact moment the pipe burst over and over in your head while you slowly drown.
That is dark. But it captures the perseverative nature of it perfectly. You are constantly re-triggering the stress response without doing anything to adapt to it.
Yeah, it's useless.
There was a fascinating study out of Calgary looking at undergraduate women. They found that ruminating about negative social interactions, like obsessing over a fight with a friend, keeps cardiovascular activation high.
Just from thinking about it.
Just from thinking about it. The argument might have ended hours ago, but because you are replaying it in your mind, your brain keeps telling your adrenal glands that you are still actively under attack.
Okay, so a thought in my head keeps my blood pressure elevated. How does that physical pressure actually break my body over time? Let's get into the mind-body connection here. The notes mention two theories for why stress targets specific organs.
The first is the somatic weakness theory. This basically posits that chronic stress will attack your genetically weakest physiological link.
So if you have a congenital vulnerability in your respiratory system, years of high stress might manifest as severe asthma.
Exactly. The second one is the specific reaction theory. This suggests that everyone has a unique, idiosyncratic biological response to stress.
Okay, like what?
Well, when overwhelmed, I might hyperventilate. You might get a massive spike in blood pressure. If you experience chronic stress, that specific, repeated biological reaction acts like a hammer hitting the same nail over and over, which makes you a prime candidate for, say, essential hypertension.
Yeah, the plumbing behind this is driven by the HPA axis, right? The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis.
Right. When you appraise a threat, this system floods your bloodstream with cortisol. Now, in short, acute bursts, cortisol is a lifesaver. It mobilizes glucose for energy and suppresses inflammation so you can survive the immediate danger.
But the textbook says chronic cortisol exposure actively suppresses the immune system. Specifically, it drops our levels of SICA, secretory immunoglobulin A. I know it drops, but what is SICA actually doing?
Okay, think of SIGA as the molecular bouncers at the doors of your body's nightclubs.
Nightclubs being my mucous membranes.
Yes, it's in your saliva, your tears, your respiratory tract. When a virus tries to enter, SIGE proteins physically bind to the pathogen, trapping it so it can't infect your cells.
Okay, go bouncers.
But the production of SIGE is highly energy dependent. When your brain is convinced you are under constant attack, chronic cortisol signals the body to halt production of these bouncers to save energy for the immediate threat.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so with the bouncers gone, that common cold virus sleeping through the dorm suddenly has VIP access to your system.
That is terrifyingly logical, and it gets even more insidious when we look at the cardiovascular system. I want to talk about the type A personality.
Oh, classic type A.
Because on college campuses, we practically worship the type A student.
Mm.
You know, the one who is hyper-competitive, juggling 3 internships, always rushing from the library to the lab. Historically, people thought being that kind of busy was a one-way ticket to a heart attack.
Yeah, that was the original hypothesis from cardiologists in the 1950s. They thought the ambition and the time urgency were destroying the heart. But modern psychophysiological research has completely refined this model.
So being a busy, overachieving student isn't what kills you.
No, it's not the hurrying or the ambition. The actual lethal component buried inside the type A profile is hostility and anger.
Wait, what?
Yeah, it's not the fact that you are studying for 12 hours a day. It's the fact that you are walking around the library, secretly resenting everyone else in the room, viewing your peers as obstacles or enemies.
Wait, how does secretly hating people give you a heart attack?
Because chronic hostility triggers a constant release of inflammatory markers. Every single time you feel that flash of anger, it causes microscopic tears in the inner lining of your blood vessels.
Oh, yikes.
And your body tries to heal those tears by sending macrophages and cholesterol to patch them up, which creates plaque. Over time, that chronic anger literally clogs your arteries.
It's the hostility, not the calendar, that breaks the heart. That is a massive distinction.
Yeah.
And it leads perfectly into the newer personality construct. Our notes highlight the type D personality. D stands for distressed.
Right. And the type D profile is just a lethal combination of two traits. First, negative affectivity, meaning a constant baseline of anxiety, gloom, and irritability. And second, profound social inhibition.
So they feel terrible all the time, but they suppress it. They don't talk about it. They have no outlet.
It's like a pressure cooker welded shut. They have all the toxic inflammatory emotions of hostility, but none of the structural social support to vent the steam.
And the data in the text is brutal. Type D cardiac patients have significantly higher mortality rates than those who don't fit the profile.
Because their physiological alarm bell is ringing constantly, but no one can hear it to help them turn it off, which honestly forces us to look at the extreme end of the spectrum. We've seen how everyday hassles, rumination, and hidden hostility degrade the body over decades.
Right.
But what happens when the stressor is so massive and so severe that it overwhelms the entire biological system in a single moment?
That is the threshold where stress becomes trauma, specifically leading to post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. We aren't just talking about a bad day anymore. PTSD involves a profound physiological rewiring after a severe threat to life or safety.
And the symptoms fall into three main clusters, right?
Yeah. First, intrusions. This isn't just remembering a bad event. It's involuntary nightmares or flashbacks where the body physically reacts as if the trauma is happening right now.
Like you're transported back.
Exactly. Second is avoidance, going to extreme lengths to avoid any trigger that might spark a memory. And third, alterations in arousal. You are hypervigilant, constantly scanning for danger, unable to sleep, startling at every sudden noise.
To ground this in reality, the textbook shares the story of a Canadian peacekeeper, Sergeant Bob Bilodeau. In 1993, he served as a UN police officer in the Muslim enclave of Srebrenica during the Yugoslav wars.
That story was so heavy.
It really was. He was forced to witness horrific atrocities and massacres that he was politically and physically powerless to stop.
Reading his account was genuinely harrowing. He developed severe PTSD and gave this chilling quote to describe his daily reality. He said, "I always wake up just before they kill me."
God.
And his story highlights something researchers call moral injury. Trauma isn't strictly limited to fearing for your own biological life. Sometimes the trauma is the unbearable psychological weight of witnessing profound human evil. It completely shatters your moral framework of how the world operates.
It's a total collapse of perceived safety and meaning. But, an enduring mystery in psychology is why two people can endure the exact same horrific event and only one develops PTSD.
Yeah, why is that?
Researchers have identified distinct risk factors. Surprisingly, having high intelligence and IQ over 115 acts as a protective buffer, likely because it correlates with a wider array of flexible coping strategies.
Okay, so high IQ is protective. On the flip side, the notes say that experiencing high levels of dissociation during the trauma, like feeling detached from your body or feeling like time is slowing down, massively increases your risk of developing PTSD.
Right, and the textbook highlights a fascinating Canadian case study regarding this. Air Transat Flight 236.
Oh, the plane that ran out of fuel.
Yes. In 2001, this passenger plane lost all power and fuel while flying over the Atlantic Ocean. The pilots announced they were going down, and the passengers endured 30 minutes of sheer terror, just gliding silently before the pilots managed a miracle emergency landing in the Azores. Everyone survived.
Wow.
But later, researchers found that about half the passengers developed PTSD and half did not.
But how is that possible?
Yeah.
They were all on the exact same plummeting planks.
So Dr. Margaret McKinnon, who was actually a passenger on that very flight, led the research. She discovered that the passengers who developed PTSD actually recalled far more non-traumatic details about the entire flight than those who didn't.
Wait, non-traumatic detail?
Yeah. The terror fundamentally altered how their amygdala processed and encoded memory, hyper-focusing their brain on every single mundane detail as if it were a threat.
So if trauma physically alters how the brain encodes memory, how do you treat it? Like, how do you unwire that fear?
Well, the textbook outlines a few major therapies. One is prolonged exposure therapy.
That's the one where they make you relive it, right?
Essentially, yes. It's a cognitive behavioral approach where a therapist safely and systematically guides the patient to repeatedly revisit the trauma memory. The mechanism here is fear extinction. By facing the memory in a safe room, the brain eventually learns that the memory itself cannot physically harm them.
Another highly utilized treatment is EMDR, eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. This involves the patient holding the traumatic image in their mind while visually tracking the therapist's moving fingers or, following a light side to side.
I always wondered how waving fingers in front of someone's face does anything for trauma. What's the actual mechanism there?
So the leading theory is based on taxing the working memory. Your brain has a limited capacity to hold information in the present moment. By forcing the brain to process the complex visual task of tracking movement while simultaneously trying to recall the traumatic memory is degraded. It becomes less vivid and less emotionally charged each time it is reconsolidated back into long-term storage.
Oh, that is brilliant. You're basically overloading the RAM in a computer so the file saves at a lower resolution.
Exactly. The notes also mention some emerging, albeit controversial, pharmacological treatments. There was a trial in Vancouver using MDMA ecstasy in conjunction with psychotherapy.
The biological logic there is fascinating, actually. MDMA stimulates the release of serotonin and dopamine, creating a profound sense of safety and social connection, while simultaneously dampening the fear response in the amygdala.
So they don't panic when thinking about it.
Right. This allows severely traumatized patients who would normally dissociate or panic when recalling their trauma to stay fully present. They can finally engage with the therapy and process the memory without their nervous system just shutting down entirely.
Using a compound historically seen as a party drug to chemically hold the brain's hand through the darkest corners of its memory. It's incredible. But before we wrap up this study session, there's a philosophical debate in the text regarding how we define trauma in the first place.
Oh, about the DSM-5.
Yeah, the DSM-5 updated its criteria for PTSD, and there was a huge debate over whether watching the September 11th attacks on television counted as a traumatic exposure. Ultimately, the committee decided the event must be witnessed in person.
It's a phenomenon called conceptual bracket creep. The field is wrestling with a really difficult question, like, if we classify everything highly stressful as trauma, does the clinical diagnosis lose its utility?
But wait, earlier we established with Lazarus that stress is entirely based on our subjective cognitive appraisal. If someone is genuinely biologically terrified by watching a horrific event on a screen and their amygdala responds with full force, can a diagnostic manual really tell them their terror isn't real trauma?
And that is the tension at the heart of health psychology. We are constantly trying to draw objective biological lines around deeply subjective human suffering. The DSM-5 requires an objective boundary for clinical precision, but, human appraisal doesn't read the manual.
It is a messy, deeply human science.
Oh, great.
We've covered a massive amount of material today.
We really have.
We started with Hans Selye's GAS model and learned that stress is an inescapable biological transaction. We saw how the daily hassles and background apps drain our allostatic load faster than major tragedies. We explored the mechanics of how rumination and hostility keep the cardiovascular system inflamed, how chronic cortisol dismantles our immune defenses, and how profound moral injury and trauma can permanently alter the way our brain encodes reality.
But as we close the book on Chapter 9, I want to pivot away from the pathology for just a second. We spent a lot of time discussing how negative emotions physically break us. But the textbook highlights a powerful biological counterweight.
A protective factor.
Yes. Research shows that having a positive emotional style actually serves as a physical shield. It makes you less likely to develop symptoms even after you've been intentionally exposed to a cold virus in a lab.
And perhaps even more importantly, the data confirms that having structural social support, like a robust network of friends, family, and community, is one of the strongest established predictors of a longer, healthier life. It's the ultimate buffer against allostatic load.
Knowledge is only valuable when you apply it, so think about what this means for you.
Exactly. As an undergrad, it is so easy to believe that the responsible thing to do is lock yourself in the library 24 hours a day to study, treating everyone else as a distraction. But based on the actual mechanics of health psychology, closing your laptop, skipping a frantic study session, and going to grab a coffee to laugh with a good friend might literally be the biological medicine your immune system needs to survive finals week. What if the ultimate life hack for your GPA isn't another hour of flashcards, but actually prioritizing the people around you? Good luck on your exams, everyone. See you next time.